And we're live with our 133rd podcast episode. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. We're super excited today to have Rob with us. We're going to be talking privacy and social media deletion and everything that Rob's been involved with over the last few years. Before we do formal introductions and dive into that, there are a couple of things. We did get accepted to teach at Black Hat, the Secure Code Review course. If you are interested, we'll post links up and we'll start promoting that pretty heavily here shortly. But that is a place that we're actually going to teach that course again, or at least virtually teach that course, I should say. That's where they're at right now. Otherwise, I think everything else is online. If we should have sent out swag to you and have not, please reach out again. We do like to ignore those emails, probably more than we should. But anyway, Ken, I don't think there's much else to review today, unless there's something else that's on your plate or on your list.
I think I've proven I can't speak very well today, so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Rob, and we can go right into it. I don't have anything to announce. So
okay, cool,
perfect, awesome. So Rob Shavell is the CEO of Abine. It is an acronym that they created, but we're having Rob on today because the product that they have is pretty interesting to us, the concept, and so we were linked up, and yeah, we're pretty interested to hear more about sort of how you can erase yourself from social media and from the internet and about privacy. And so this is what we're going to jump into today. But I think I'll have Rob, I think I'll have you sort of talk a bit about your background. And I'd love, one thing we always ask of our guests is to kind of tell us a bit about how they entered the security space. Why we ask that is because it's very different and unique per person. And it's always interesting for the audience. So it's just something, if you could talk a little bit about yourself and your background there, would be awesome.
Yeah, thanks guys. And thanks for having me, and congratulations on 133 of these podcasts. And I'll tell you, you made me feel better with the introductions, because if you guys don't have it perfect after 133 times, then I feel more comfortable hanging out with you guys virtually. But yeah, let me start with a little background, and let's go anywhere you guys or the audience might want us to go. So first off, I'd say let me mention how I got into security, as you asked, Ken. A bunch of sort of characters, let's call them entrepreneurs. We're sitting around, the table in Boston about 10 years ago, and we were discussing sort of the big trends happening in the tech industry. And at this point, if you can remember back that far, some of you may not be able to. I don't blame you. Facebook was not even a public company. It just sort of been expanding from, a private network to colleges, and then opening up to different interest groups, and finally thinking about its own public offering as it completely opened as a social network. And what myself and my two much smarter friends got to, who were actually fraternity brothers at MIT. When they were studying computer science together, whatever a fraternity at MIT means, still haven't figured that out. But their concerns were about all of the data that was about to be shared with these social networks by everyone. It was one thing when Facebook and other social apps, which were all the rage back then, were more private and private to certain groups. But as they opened up, and now we don't even think about social networks or messaging apps being really private to anyone. As they open up, the concern was, hey, where's all this data going to go? It's going up into the cloud, and what's going to happen to it? And I was an investor at the time in Silicon Valley. Basically a peon at SoftBank Venture Capital, and I had just seen a lot of sort of copycat companies all chasing one thing or another, including a lot of security companies sort of trying to do the same thing over and over because it was wildly popular. And this notion of what's going to happen to my data in an area in a era where we're sharing it across all these different platforms and clouds and social networks sounded really interesting to me, and it sounded different enough from what was happening. If the trend in the industry was, hey, let's share everything. Social networking is amazing. Let's lean into it. Let's start all these companies to share data. I wanted to cut the other way and be a contrarian and think about the security and privacy of that data. And that's how I got into the business, and that's how we came up with the acronym for the company that you mentioned, ABINE. It's short for a bit is not enough. A bit of privacy and security is not enough.
I like it. That's awesome. This looks like Seth's talking, but he's muted.
Man, you'd think I could find the mute button after 133 episodes, Rob, but I'm still having problems. Yeah, I mean, I dig that, kind of background. And I mean, I remember 10 years ago, but the gray comes out. So that's where we're at. So, from that point then, right, like it sounds like you came to security more from kind of the investment side of things. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was actually not a coder myself.
Okay.
And I had to kind of learn from the outside in as I worked with my co-founders and developers, and I had to have them educate me on Wireshark and other tools, and show me, and that you guys and your audience knows all about, and show me just how pervasive this data tracking and data collection was behind the scenes, and I think that's one of the things that made a big impact on me, because I was coming at it more from a average user standpoint. When you open your browser, you're not aware per se of all of the information going back and forth over the wire, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really interesting, right? Like, I mean, I know we've had guests on from all different kind of backgrounds, and everybody comes to security from their own, or has their own story to tell, I guess I should say. But yeah, I just find that transition there, pretty interesting from SoftBank in and coming in from more of a, like, it sounds like you had more of an established career, right? And it wasn't necessarily a spin that you were, I don't know if you were considering it in that, before then. Is it because you were involved with more security startups, or just the general, the friends that you had, the other founders that you met up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think life is, is kind of random in a lot of ways, and it would be good if we all admitted that a little bit more to ourselves. Luck and so on has a big impact on what we do. And I would say that yes, I was involved in investing in some security companies in Silicon Valley, and year 2000, 2001, 2002, and it was always interesting. But what really drew me to this area was sort of the contrarian nature of it, and the concern that I thought just made a lot of sense to me around what happens to all this data. And that's what led me in. And once you, as many of you guys know, once you get into this industry, whether it's from the security side or the application developer side, or what have you, DevOps, it doesn't matter. it's a rat hole, and once you go down it, you can fall pretty far.
Yep.
And I think privacy is starting to shed its skin and come a little bit more into the light, and it's also got similar, so related to security, but also different. That's something we should talk about later.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, you start to think about, you think about all the different rabbit holes. And I mean, definitely, podcast listeners all have their kind of niche in what they fill and, the spaces that they're at. But we all touch data at some level, right? And I know from a personal perspective as well, right? Like we've always talked about this, like the whole social media aspect of, if you don't pay for it, then you are the product. You're being sold, your data is being sold to advertisers or to someone else. And so it's interesting to start thinking about, okay, how do you pull your presence off of that? How do you actually, overwhelm the system? I know you've got Delete Me as kind of the main site or whatever, or the main app that you guys, I don't know if that's the first one that you started with there. But how did you go about approaching that problem, right? Was it, dealing with companies, or was it, logging into someone's account, deleting posts? Like how do you approach that problem from just a strictly, hey, I want to take myself offline?
Yeah. Well, we sort of tried to address the problem at a higher level. We said, hey, what's really the problem with all this data going out about us? Is it that the data, is it intrinsically bad, to share data, or is there a way that we can create some sort of equilibrium or balance between the data that we share and that other third parties have on us and the data that we control? And so we started sort of with that as a concept, and the product suite that we eventually brought to market was actually for consumers first. And what we said was, hey, there's three sort of big problems with your data. One is when you open your browser on your phone or your computer, there's all kinds of data leaking out that that the average user, not your audience, never sees. Third-party tracking, fingerprinting. The people that in the security industry are very familiar with using some of this for security reasons, right? Looking at what devices and creating rule sets for them and things like that. So there's just a tremendous amount of data collection happening just around your IP address and your client. And that was one thing that we thought needed attention, and we created a product for it that we call the Tracker Blocker. And it is similar to an ad blocker in the sense that you install it as an extension to your browser. That's where it lives, and it can it has sort of a simple list of the third-party data collectors that are most common across the top 1 million websites. And so those calls that happen to those obscure ad tech, obscure and not so obscure, ranging from Google Analytics and Facebook to much more longer tail things. The Tracker Blocker would catch those calls on the client side and not send them, or send dummy data to them, and in that way making the tracking either useless or not happen at all. And so that was the first part of what we consider to be the privacy problem, and the first product that we.
Okay.
Should I go on, or do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know, like, okay, as a developer, I go back and forth on this quite a bit, right? Like from a tracking perspective and user usability, right? Like of applications, and being able to know when there's problems, and also from a security perspective, because all this data like you go visit a website, and yes, there's the third-party trackers, but there's also all the data that the application itself stores about you. There's the stuff that you choose to share on social media that you like, that maybe you consider to be private, or maybe you just don't know. I mean, how many of those posts have we seen over time, especially from friends and family, that they'll post about, oh, you have to go into Facebook and do X, Y, and Z to make sure that Facebook isn't like sharing your data with the Russians, right? Like that's I mean, we haven't seen as much of it recently, but it's still out there, and that stuff still happens. And so that's like, it sounds like the initial approach was, okay, we're targeting consumers. And like, how was the reception there, right? Like, what was your, what consumers were actually interested in it? How did they receive it?
It's a good, your comment made me think back to when we first brought it out. And, I think consumers generally liked it, but they were a little, I would say they were a little baffled. Hey, what's going on here? Is this really helping me? Because they couldn't see it that much. And the category, the products that did the same thing with a little less nuance than us were ad blockers. And ad blockers became a huge category adopted by hundreds of millions of consumers, because they didn't want as much advertising, and they could see it working. When they installed an ad blocker, pretty much all of the ads, the banner ads and so forth that they saw while browsing were blocked. So, I think it is a really interesting area where there's security benefits for developers implementing everything from home pages to login screens for applications and so forth, where they're trying to get data for for rate limiting or abuse or customer verification, and sometimes their techniques and practices can get in the way of these privacy kind of enabling client-side tools, which ultimately want to make the client one of many rather than super unique. And I think it's an area where application and web developers and security engineers and privacy tools and services could do a better job bridging the gap and talking together about certain standards or implementation practices that would work well for both sides. One of the reasons that doesn't happen is, as you guys know, nobody likes to share their secret sauce in this business because they think it'll be reverse engineered and taken advantage of, and that's yet again another impediment to making a smooth consumer experience for browsing the web.
Yeah, I mean, and we've struggled with this in the security space for years, right? Like some of the ad blocking headers, some of the like I even think of like some of the low level like XSS protection headers that we've tried to build into browsers and things like that, or what is it? It's not HSTS, but there was a precursor to that, right? Like we try to dictate these standards, and then the browser builders, manufacturers, those developers don't, either they interpret it in a different way, or it's not standardized across them because they don't want to be the same, because they want to promote theirs over the other, and then. I mean, that leads to the whole new Google, whatever ad tracking that they're going to be doing. Flacco, is that what it's called?
Flock, yeah.
Flock, there you go. Yeah. And so it all feeds into kind of that privacy idea. And everybody's always creeped out about, Facebook or whatever, like popping ads because they're supposedly listening to everyone's phones all the time. And you talk about, visiting, I don't know, Costa Rica or something. And then the next day you're getting ads popped up on your phone, even though you haven't done any searches about it. Right.
Right.
And so I think that all feeds into this, at least this feeling that you're being watched. But as a consumer, it's also, okay, how do I prevent that from happening? So ad trackers is where a lot of people have turned is, hey, I want to just block all the ads, just period. But how do you?
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
and
I don't know.
again, to your comment, I think I, I think my view on this has changed since I've been in the industry. And I used to have a more, I'd say, gray area view or opinion that, hey, average, websites, podcasts, everybody needs to make money. We need advertising. It's a necessary, sort of part of the internet, and we have to find the right balance. And I think my views have changed a little bit to become more extreme in the sense that I do believe you're being watched. And I believe not just watched, surveilled. And I do believe that every practice that Amazon Echo and Google and your TV manufacturer and your search feed and the third parties that are getting data when you visit websites, those are creating huge, very, very sophisticated data lakes at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you name it. And I think that the algorithms that are running ostensibly just to serve us a better advertising product are doing much more than that. And I do think it's gotten much, much worse to the point where it is, if they open the full kimono, which they've never done, they've never taken an inch of leg up, to be honest. It would be highly concerning. And I think the things with the 2016 election and, to your point, like Russia conspiracy theories and everything else are starting to highlight to the average person, hey, there's more going on in the background with all this data I've shared than I ever expected there would be. And that's why I think we're going to see a lot of legislation here in the U.S., probably during the Biden administration, because it's hard to see any other way to establish a foundation of control for consumers. But at any rate, let me stop there.
No, I mean, it brings up a good point, and something that I've thought a lot about is that, like, to your point, yes, at one point this was all used to serve better serve ads, but now we've seen. I've thought a lot about the fact that if someone was to have a complete picture of what you do online, they have a complete picture of you as a person, your behavior, your personality traits, your interests. Right now, not a huge deal, but at some point, as things get a little bit more, I think there's no denying that there has been a sweeping change politically, and to the point where it can be fearful to even express your opinions anymore. You can be afraid to express opinions because it might have ramifications. So as those types of things start to creep into our culture, which is what I feel anyways, and again, maybe that's just me and maybe that's just my tinfoil hatness, but having a complete picture and a complete profile of who I am and my dissenting thought patterns is scary.
It's very troubling, I think, and I don't think it's a tinfoil hat phenomenon, and I'll tell you why. Our Delete Me service, which you guys have sort of mentioned as a social media removal tool, what it actually is you sign up for our service, joindelevy.com, and you put in your information, basically your address, your past addresses, the email addresses you use, your phone numbers, this kind of personal information set that you typically use to sort of sign up for places or fill out forms, whether it's offline or online. You give that to us, and our privacy advisors and our search tools behind the scenes go out and find where that information resides at different data brokers. And there's dozens, if not hundreds, of these data brokers now out there that collect and correlate all this information about us, turn it into profiles, and basically sell those profiles both online, so it's easily search on Google, and they also sell them to other businesses, which they do not name. And so, to your point about the culture changing, when you're expressing an opinion, what we've seen, and the Delete Me service, by the way, it's not cheap. It's $129 a year. And we do run it all year, and you get these reports that show you exactly where your information was found, exactly where it was removed, and people love that. But again, I'd go back to the point where this is not a cheap service, right? This is a significant investment for many people in terms of this kind of spending. I don't have a lot of these kind of services, and we're doubling or tripling revenues every year. And businesses are signing up and consumers are signing up. And now why are they? Because they are experiencing this culture that you're talking about, Ken, which is they express an opinion, whether it's on social, Twitter or Facebook or something else, and somebody goes and Googles them and finds something about them, their family, where they live, and they make a threat. They harass them. They use it in scary ways, and you don't know who's going to do that and when in this particular culture, which has become such a boiling pot for opinions and so forth, and it's scaring people, and it should, and then the threat can go quickly from an online form, which is obviously relatively safe, at least from a physical standpoint, to to an offline physical threat, and that has a lot of people deeply concerned, and that's one of the reasons that our service is growing so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, suppression of thought and opinions is something that is very scary, I think, to a lot of people. And again, we talked about this. I don't know, within the last 6 months. I don't remember when. Well, I guess whenever Parler went down, was brought down, we talked about some of the side ramifications that maybe people would not consider, which is like, look, we saw that when tech giants didn't like a certain platform, they took them down, and we see I see it anyways. I don't know, Seth, I don't want to lump you in, but I see the tech giants, especially when it comes to social media specifically, being the folks that are they're in control. They're in the driver's seat. And like I said, it gets a little scary to think of somebody having as much information. Like, honestly, I'm less concerned about the information that someone like LexisNexis stores about me, right? Because we've got protections for like fraud and for your, abuse of your social security number and your date of birth and your medical information, all that. That we've at least got some protections around that. And so it's less of a concern for me as a person than just like, being monitored more personally like that. So I did want to expand upon what you touched on there for a second, because like here, I'll just put it up on the screen. So Ken Toller, and I just totally blocked you out. So let me pin you real quick. Sorry, still blocking you out. But we did want to expand a little bit about anything you can share with us about tracking and your thoughts in general, from like Facebook owning Oculus VR, and obviously within the Oculus yes, you can play games, but there's a lot more that you can do inside of there. And let me take this off the screen. So yeah, just curious to hear a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think the combination of hardware monitoring products driven by the big social media companies, or just rather big tech, is tremendously concerning. I'm sure it's no surprise to hear me say that, because I'm biased and I run a privacy company, but I really do believe that the huge investment in product development that Facebook, Amazon, and M&A, also Facebook, Amazon, Google are making to try to get into your home is absolutely something to be concerned about. And in most cases, people and families are welcoming these products into their home and actually paying to expand the surveillance and algorithmic sort of monitoring from big tech right down to, their breakfast table or their television in their living room. And, it feels to me very similar to 10 years ago almost when we talk about the digital home, because it feels exciting and fun, just like sharing things on Facebook used to feel 10 years ago. Hey, this is really cool. This is new. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google. Hey, talk to my TV screen. Look at my Ring doorbell. It's neat, and you can feel that sort of excitement on the consumer side, and the people that are building these products. Hopefully some are listening. I think they've. I was reading the last week the whole page that Alexa had come up with for their privacy page, written and designed to communicate the privacy settings for consumers. And it's almost like somebody with 10 years of experience in this business like me reads through that page and they're like, wow, I mean, this is fantastic marketing, but there's no setting here. There really isn't, or at least I'd love to have that debate. So I think it's very hard to have your cake and eat it too with these products, these hardware products. I think they're constantly monitoring you, and you have to really want the everyday benefits more than having concern about this data being used in unknown ways in the future, which is really, I think, the concern, not can I get better advertising, because that's not a big deal to me.
Yeah.
No, that's what I mean. Is I think it's a normal. We set again something Seth and I have talked about numerous times, both on the podcast and at I remember talking about this, Seth, at a panel in Australia, like in 2019-ish, where it was a question about are you concerned about those types of smart devices? And the answer was, I'm more concerned that we're normalizing that for future generations, that it's okay to give up privacy for comfort and convenience. And I think and safety, right? I mean, this has become a theme, I feel like, but we're basically normalizing that for future generations. And it's interesting, man. It's very interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that we were told when we started the company by investors who didn't want to invest in it was, and we were told this repeatedly by venture capitalists, all up and down Silicon Valley, was, thanks guys, don't want to invest in privacy because the younger generation doesn't care about it. And we just heard that all the time. It's very hard to raise money for a privacy company back then. I think times have finally changed, and there's money flowing in now. But that opinion was absolutely the prevalent one. And I think it's interesting to talk to teenagers and younger millennials and things like that, because they're the first generation that's grown up, obviously, with all of this technology around them, and they don't think twice about it, and they're on their devices all the time, and especially during COVID. I mean, that has just become, the way that this generation, spends its time together, sadly. But I don't think what's happened is they don't, at least from what we hear anecdotally, and from our the limited data we have on our customers, I don't think what's happened is they are willing to share everything, and they don't think about it at all. Rather, they are very much more careful than the older generation about their online personas. They're actually very careful about it. And if you talk to them and interview them, they'll say, hey, I share this kind of stuff with my family on Facebook. I share this other stuff on Snapchat. I got this messenger for this game for that. And so what they're really doing is they're doing something that we think is very important. It's sort of part of our third product that I haven't talked about, which is they're compartmentalizing their online activities so that they can create personas in different domains that make sense and reflect what they want, not a unified surveillance profile that is the same, that is the truest, authentic expression of who they are. And I think it's actually a sophisticated response by the younger generation to the data environment that they were born into.
And I mean, that's interesting because that goes back to kind of the whole tinfoil hat wearing days from 20 years ago, right? I remember signing up for Twitter and for Facebook, and when people are like, "Oh, I'm going to share everything," it was always like the security community always came into it as, "Yeah, you probably want to be more nuanced than that," right? Like that was always my discussion with friends and family was, yeah, we just don't share that, right? Like telling my wife, she just got into this habit that like it was very, very compartmentalized. Like, what is it that I publicly put out there? And it was because of the tinfoil hat that I was wearing. Like, we're definitely more public about kind of this like work interface that we have through Twitter and some of the other channels. But I think that nuanced view of social media wasn't always the case, right? 10 years ago. So it's interesting that the younger generation has picked up on that, and that's how they're using it. But that doesn't necessarily help their parents either, right? Like the stuff that is shared by, some of the older generation is still quite concerning, I guess, right? Is the only thing that I can think of there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the security community has always practiced what they preached, at least in my experience dealing with all my developers, all my security friends, a bunch of our customers. And one good example is just email. Most of the security folks that I know have long used different emails or dot emails or their own domain aliased as they sign up for things to do this a form of this compartmentalization that I'm talking about. It allows you to track who's got your email, which email you're giving out, and so forth. And one of our other products called Blur allows consumers to sort of do this easily and create disposable or reusable email aliases as they're signing up for things. And it's one of the attempts we made to try to bring the practices that we saw happening by security professionals into a more consumer friendly form. And I think that's been a very, very popular feature.
Yeah, I mean that's where I go. I mean that's where I appreciate what you guys are doing over there at Abine, because it's like when I talk to friends and family, I know that they don't have, like, if they're non-technical, they don't have that discipline, right? Like I know they're just using the same email and the same password for everything, and then just trying to get them to use like passphrases and different passphrases or password keepers for all different sites is a difficult thing to do. And I know the danger of it. And then I mean, even as simple as running like malware scans and virus scanners, they have a tendency to forget about it or to not do it. And then I get the call of, "Hey, my computer's being slow," and I'm like, "Well, it's because your data is being sent to 4 different countries every time that you open it up." But and so that's where I was going to, is like, that's where I appreciate somebody actually trying to make that easier for consumers. And I see that Blur also has like a password, utility.
Yeah, so I would say, look, this other product that we developed to again, rewind back to the problems that we were trying to solve in privacy when we started the company was, hey, I have to give out maybe I'm blocking all the third-party tracking that I can, and that's great. I feel more private when I browse around. But now I have to go to websites and sign up and register and give out my information explicitly, not implicitly. So what do I do about that? What do I do about that problem? And Blur was built as a password manager that deeply embedded into its product architecture was aliasing, or what we call masking, germane to the pandemic, of your personal information. So every time you click into a field that wants your email address, your phone number, your credit card, you have a choice. Hey, you want to share? Do you trust these guys? Are they your bank? You should probably share your real email and your real phone number with the bank. But if if they're, some company you're shopping at one time, or they're making you go through a paywall to get something that you may or may not use, you probably don't want to share. Or if they had a data breach recently, you probably don't want to share your real personal information. And Blur was designed to give you as many aliases for as many registrations or relationships with websites or apps as you wanted, and even allow you to pay them with a credit card that wasn't your real credit card. So that was the design of it. And to your point about ease of use, we tried to integrate it into the password manager so that it was no different feeling for somebody than when they choose it to make a strong password from a password manager or from their web browser. The last thing I would say is it's hard to make this stuff easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that we haven't seen it progress too far. And then on top of that as well, right? Like we're like, oh, things like 2FA, right? Or, two-factor authentication. What happens? It comes out and everybody's like, oh, we're going to send you a code over your phone. And then the security industry figures out a way that we can exploit that and actually take over like people's cell phone accounts, right? It feels like at times we undermine our own authority with and our own recommendations to consumers. And I don't envy non-technical people trying to step into the space and figure out what to do, because it used to be that all I have to do is create a password, and you're giving me these like 4 different things that I have to do. It has to be at least 8 characters long, and have numbers and letters, and okay, then it's secure, and that's the feeling that they walk away from for their online banking account, but they don't. Yeah, but then they end up using that same password for Facebook, right? Or for LinkedIn or other places that they trust. And going back to Ken's point earlier, right? That it's the companies that are in charge of that data when it comes down to it. And when they get breached, it's the consumers that pay the price.
Exactly.
And so I don't know what to do. And I wanted to flip this a little bit. I know there's this point from Ken as well again, but I wanted to flip this because we do have 15 minutes left, and ask you what you think that like developers, so not from a consumer perspective, but from a developer and like company perspective, what do you feel like developers should be doing to help out in these use cases, right? Because I know we know people that work for Netflix and for Facebook and other places, and they're trying to protect data, but it's not necessarily under their purview. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to ask this question.
It's been on my list since we started talking, but yes, go ahead, Rob.
I spent some time several years ago with folks that were espousing privacy by design as a cliched term and a sort of software development methodology, so to speak. And my takeaway after looking at that, talking to developers, working in this industry, is that it's a tough one. And the developers and security professionals out there are in a tough place. And I don't believe it's realistic to come on a podcast like this and say, yeah, you should really pay attention to what data you're tracking and minimize the metadata and blah, 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 because I think it's a lot of horse shit. I think that developers are not in control of making decisions that are pro-privacy at the application layer, at the data layer. They're really generally not the ones with authority to make the decisions on those data models and how that data is piped across, replicated, and stored. And I think them speaking up will probably be seen as as heresy, basically. And I think that if you look at what the smartest companies are doing, aka Google, in my opinion, they are trying to get ahead of this issue by things like that you touched on, like Flock, where they're eliminating third-party cookies now that they have a monopoly over the browser, and doing things that are logically, technically sophisticated, client-side data processing, and sort of algorithms that could be privacy invasive, running only on the client, sharing data back selectively with the server, and I think that architecture is one that we lost, with 10 years of cloud development, and I think should come back. So I think if there's one, so I guess to summarize, one, I'm a little skeptical that I have anything good to say for developers or DevOps people that want to be pro-privacy. But two, I would say look to the kinds of things Google is doing, and think about the client side as a place to process data that's particularly sensitive, and share back with the server sort of what you need to know. So the server acts as a sort of a more need to know basis when it comes to the exchange of information that could be highly sensitive or highly private, and let the user opt into having the logic run on the client side.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a good recommendation, right? Like exactly what you're saying. I fear, especially someone new coming into a company that doesn't have that control, all of a sudden, telling them, hey, you shouldn't be storing all this data. They're going to be viewed as contrarian. They're going to be viewed as, tinfoil hat. Oh, don't ask him about it. Like, because we need all this data to make money, or, that's the company is built around it. If they don't have it, maybe they don't have a job. Right. So you're absolutely right.
Maybe in some cases, but there is a case for those same developers to make a point about the less that we take from folks, the less we need to be concerned about from a legal standpoint, or if we're breached, how much we're culpable for.
And to your point, Ken, it's coming. The legal ramification, and that's why Google's out ahead of this thing. It's not because they really care, in my opinion. It's because they want to be ahead of the legal wave of privacy legislation and consumer rights that is coming. And it's happening all around the world, and it's going to happening in certain states in the U.S. and I believe it's going to happen, nationally. So the more I think about it, the more I do think for there are things that developers can do and can think about, and one of them is giving. So one of them is data deletion, right? The ability to instrument the code that you're creating to enable a sort of trace route type of deletion across what is a unique member ID or something like that, because that will be almost guaranteed a requirement of future legislation. And if you don't think about that when you're building the applications or the databases or the security layers of an application paradigm, it becomes very, very messy to implement it post hoc. So that's another concrete thing. And I think that developers that do that and do it thoughtfully will be in high demand going forwards by companies.
When GDPR kicked in, we had to, so I work for GitHub, right? So we had to build in functionality to allow you to basically, we had to go back, and it was actually more, to your point, it's actually more difficult to go back and create functions that allow you to export all of your stuff easily, so that can be ported over to another platform to be forgotten, so to speak, on the platform. It is actually harder to go back after the fact and do that if you don't plan for that. So, and I'm saying, because I actually did the review of that functionality, so I'm keenly aware of that fact. So, well, that's something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's interesting, right? Because security and privacy are, like, we are always kind of talk about them side by side, but they are definitely two different concepts and two different aspects of developing an application. But we have this same discussion about security, right? Like, if we don't build security in early, it becomes more expensive to do it after the fact. And we should be having that same discussion about privacy here, right? If we build privacy in early, the ability to delete, the ability to, control what data is stored or how it's actually used, it's going to be less expensive if we do that in the, from a software development perspective in the requirements phase and just build it into the application, then trying to bolt it on after the fact. And that's where I think GDPR, the California privacy regulations, right? Like, I think that's where those have been so hard for companies to implement or to align with, is because of the expense that goes into it. They've been thinking about security and privacy as one and the same when they probably shouldn't be.
100%. I think that's absolutely correct. And I don't think, the other point I'd make is I don't think it's just about technical compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And for developers, I think my other thought is, hey, don't be totally myopic. I think privacy, obviously I'm biased, but I think privacy does present new opportunities for developers. If you're working at a company and you see them paying complete lip service and the data is a god-awful mess and it's everywhere, and there's absolutely no concern for privacy in your company or in the category of application that your company is developing, there may be an opportunity to go outside and start a company with a similar product or service that is privacy respecting. If you talk to Gabriel, DuckDuckGo, and some of the other privacy companies that I talk with regularly, there is enough demand now, finally, by consumers and by businesses for services that are privacy first and can really stand up and say, hey, we respect your data, this, that, and the other thing, and can show and prove that is true, that there are real business opportunities, and the venture capital industry is investing, and I think it shouldn't be lost on people that they're always, you can always think like an entrepreneur.
It's at least inspiring,
yeah,
and hopeful, or makes me hopeful.
Hopeful. So we should become privacy nihilists now too. Is that what? No.
Privacy optimists.
Privacy optimists. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah. I'm glad to hear that, actually.
Well, at least until facial recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
widely rolled out.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, again, the tinfoil hat side is like, you see in China, they're using AI, they're using biometrics, and they're creating fingerprints and tracking citizens and penalizing those that have dissenting opinions that are not pro-government. And yes, that's China, but how long until that's elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
China is absolutely a global power.
Yeah.
So these are the things that concern me.
Well, and I mean, because I had to go, I mean, Ken knows this, when we worked together, I went to China for, a couple months, right? But it was very interesting. Yeah, I know. But it was very interesting to kind of feel that level of of scrutiny and what was accepted. And this kind of goes back to the normalization of lack of privacy, is the more that we give up when we've had these freedoms, or we've had this privacy for so long, and we're giving it up for convenience, or we're giving it up for security, or whatever other thing that is interesting to us. You don't get that back, right? The companies know it, and when they get breached, what happens, right? Those data lakes are what scares me, or what, when it gets pushed to a huge data analytics firm, or, another country, somebody that's going to use that nefariously, what can they do with that? Can they build a profile of you, your online activities, your online? It's just an interesting problem. So
I believe it's everything that you guys touched on is super relevant. And, I spend some time in China myself, from a business perspective, rather than from a privacy perspective. And, I personally, I love the Chinese people and I hate their government. And obviously it's probably a cliche statement for somebody that runs a privacy company, but I do think, China is sort of the canary in the coal mine here. Is that where we're skating towards, or not? And I think that these issues are, they come down to, your personal freedoms, right? And we're going to have to draw a line somewhere, because the technology right now has progressed and is continuing to progress to the point where a few buttons can be pushed and we are China. So it is literally going to be up to us as an industry, as a government, to, and as a collection of, citizens, to decide where to draw those lines. And I think the last 10 years, the technology industry has been unfettered, growth and connectivity and data sharing and everything else. And I think that this, the 2020s are really going to be about where do we draw those lines as the technology continues to develop at its own pace, which it will always do.
Yep. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's up to us as individuals, and if you're pro freedom, you should be pro privacy. Take the responsibility and the accountability. Wow, there's so much to unpack here today.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm coming away with warm fuzzies here, Rob. Come on, like you were supposed to. But no, it's about what I expected, right? Like being in the space, we see that, but I do see it more from a technical perspective, because I mean, we're in the code. It's like the data that we're retrieving. I know what I can get out of a browser. I know what's being sent, and it's interesting to hear your take on, okay, we're trying to protect that now, or we're trying to give consumers at least some modicum of control.
Look, I think if I was to put a silver lining on this, and I do think there is one, it's that anyone can do a few simple things and get a reasonably, appreciably better amount of privacy in their daily life. Whether they use Delete Me or remove themselves from data brokers, minimize the amount of sharing they have on social media, use unique passwords, use a tracker blocker, an ad blocker. All those things are not rocket science these days, and the tools, whether it's ours or others, are getting better and better. So those things do make a difference. Talk to Edward Snowden, talk to us. They actually do make a difference when you have less unique identifiers out there with third parties to connect them together. You will see a dramatic downturn in the data profiles that are out there about you. This, coupled with legislation, rolling out from California east, is actually gonna, I think, put people, 3 or 4 years from now, in a much better place in terms of their rights and ability to control their data and their privacy than they are today. So I think that's the silver lining.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, we want to be cognizant of your time, because you've given it to us here, but we've been going for an hour, but I think that's kind of a good bow to put on it, is there are things that you can do, and just realizing that it's out there and the ability is there. And then from a developer or like security professional perspective, sharing that with friends and family and pushing them that direction. Like when they ask what they can do, give them concrete steps to take or places to go.
100%. That is your job. All security developers and conscious professionals, your job is to go educate, your 100, your social circle. Your social network should be to educate, and further these principles. It's really important, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Ken's popping that up there now. If you're interested, go take a look. Like I said, we're very appreciative of you coming on and sharing your opinions, your backstory, how you've gotten into it, and your expertise, right? Like it's super interesting. We'll keep the conversation going, I'm sure, on Slack and Twitter and other places. But is there any place, like if people wanted to continue this conversation with you specifically or with Abind, like how would they reach you? Are you guys on social media? Right?
First of all, you can reach us through our websites, and you can also reach me directly, rob@abind.com.
Okay.
And happy to continue the conversation with anybody, or field questions. We do it all the time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah. We'll send that out to the world as well with everything else. And I think that's everything for now. We don't want to impinge on your time too much because we're appreciative of the help and the discussion. Ken, any last minute thoughts before we call it for today?
No, just thank you, Rob. This was awesome. Very, very, very fun conversation, very relevant. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the folks that listened today.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back next week.
All right.